Have you ever wondered why intelligent people sometimes defend ideas that seem clearly false? Or why entire crowds follow decisions that end up harming everyone, even when the facts are right in front of anyone willing to look? This is an uncomfortable question, but an extremely important one. Because understanding this phenomenon may reveal something unsettling about the way societies actually function. During one of the darkest periods of modern history, a man began to reflect deeply on this mystery. His name was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a German theologian who lived during the Nazi regime. As he watched the dramatic transformation of his own society, he realized something disturbing. Perhaps the greatest danger to humanity was not just deliberate evil, but something far more silent. Bonhoeffer realized that intelligent, educated, and apparently rational people could support dangerous ideas without realizing what they were doing. Teachers, doctors, religious leaders, and ordinary citizens began repeating destructive narratives as if they were unquestionable truths. What was happening there did not seem to be simple ignorance. There was something much deeper behind that collective behavior. The conclusion he reached was unsettling. According to Bonhoeffer, stupid people can become more dangerous than malicious ones. The reason is simple and frightening at the same time. Conscious evil can be recognized, confronted, and fought. Stupidity, however, when it spreads socially, creates an almost impenetrable resistance to arguments, facts, and evidence. And the most disturbing detail is that this dynamic does not belong only to the past. The same psychological forces that Bonhoeffer observed in the 1940s are still present today, influencing collective decisions, shaping public opinion, and often leading entire crowds down dangerous paths without them even realizing it. If you enjoy exploring ideas that challenge our certainties and help us better understand human behavior, it is worth following this kind of reflection regularly. So if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, consider subscribing, leaving a like, and turning on notifications. That way you will not miss the next videos that explore topics like this in greater depth. In 1943, at the height of World War II, Bonhoeffer was arrested for participating in the resistance against the regime of Adolf Hitler. Inside prison, isolated from the outside world, he began to reflect on an extremely disturbing question. How had a country known for producing some of the greatest philosophers, scientists, and thinkers in history turned into a society capable of accepting atrocities? The answer he found was surprising. The problem was not the intelligence of the people, but the collective behavior that emerges when individuals stop thinking for themselves. In his letters written in prison, Bonhoeffer presented a deeply uncomfortable idea. When critical thinking is abandoned and individual thought dissolves within the crowd, even the most sophisticated societies can slowly walk toward disaster. For a long time, we believed that stupidity simply meant a lack of intelligence. The common image is that of someone uninformed, unable to understand complex ideas or reason clearly. But the observations of Dietrich Bonhoeffer completely break with this comfortable assumption. For him, the most dangerous form of stupidity does not arise from ignorance, but from something far deeper and more unsettling: the voluntary abandonment of one's own ability to think. This idea is unsettling because it contradicts what we normally expect from human intelligence. Bonhoeffer realized that highly educated, cultured, and even brilliant people can act in surprisingly irrational ways. It is not a matter of lacking knowledge, but of a moment when the individual stops using their own mind. The intelligence is still there, but it is no longer applied with independence. When this happens, something curious becomes visible in the person's behavior. Instead of forming their own thoughts, they begin repeating ready-made phrases, popular ideas, and slogans circulating around them. The words may sound sophisticated, sometimes even convincing, but if you observe closely, you realize there is no real reflection behind them. There is only repetition. Bonhoeffer described this situation in an almost disturbing way. When speaking with someone in this state, you do not feel that you are dealing with a person reflecting in front of you. The sensation is more like talking to a collection of memorized phrases, as if external thoughts had taken over the space where personal judgment once existed. That is why arguing with someone in this condition often becomes such a frustrating experience. Logical arguments, evidence, and facts rarely produce any effect. Not because the person is incapable of understanding, but because the internal process of evaluation has simply stopped functioning. The mind is no longer open to examining ideas. It only protects what has already been accepted. This phenomenon creates a kind of psychological shield. Any information that contradicts the adopted belief is immediately rejected, often without even being considered. The individual begins reacting automatically, as if defending something that had already been decided long before the conversation even began. Thinking stops being an active process. The most unsettling aspect is that this transformation can happen in an extremely subtle way. No one wakes up one day deciding to abandon their critical capacity. The process usually begins with small concessions, accepting a simplified explanation here, repeating a popular opinion there, trusting too much in the safety of collective consensus. Over time, these small concessions create a dangerous mental habit. Instead of carefully analyzing each idea, the individual begins trusting whatever appears socially accepted or emotionally comfortable. Thinking requires effort, while repeating requires only memory. Little by little, the mind becomes accustomed to the easier path. It is exactly at this point that stupidity, in the sense described by Bonhoeffer, begins to solidify. The person remains intelligent, articulate, and capable of speaking with conviction. But something essential has been lost. The willingness to examine what they believe. Thought stops being investigation and becomes mere confirmation. This detail completely changes how we should understand the problem. If stupidity were simply a lack of intelligence, education alone would be enough to solve it. But when it arises from the renunciation of independent thinking, the challenge becomes far more complex. The problem is not insufficient information, but the voluntary suspension of judgment. Perhaps that is why Bonhoeffer considered this phenomenon so dangerous. A poorly informed person can still learn, but someone who has stopped thinking rarely feels the need to question what they believe. And when this condition spreads among many people at the same time, something far larger begins to take shape. Because when individuals stop thinking for themselves, another force inevitably fills that empty space. External ideas begin to occupy the collective mind, and little by little a scenario emerges where individual thoughts dissolve into shared narratives. It is precisely at this moment that the influence of power begins to reveal its most silent strength. When Bonhoeffer began observing German society around him, he noticed something deeply unsettling. Stupidity rarely appears in isolation within a single individual. It flourishes much more easily when there is a collective environment that favors conformity. In other words, certain structures of power create the perfect conditions for ordinary people to abandon, almost without realizing it, their own mental independence. Large political movements, dominant ideologies, and rigid social structures share a common characteristic. They offer simple answers to complex realities. In times of uncertainty, this promise of clarity exerts a powerful attraction. For many individuals, accepting a ready-made narrative feels far more comfortable than facing the solitary effort of thinking critically. It is at this moment that something subtle begins to happen inside the human mind. Under social pressure, fear, or the desire to belong, the individual begins transferring their responsibility for judgment to the authority of the group. Truth stops being something that needs to be investigated and becomes something that is simply accepted because everyone around seems to believe it. Collective power possesses a psychological force that is difficult to perceive when we are immersed within it. When many people repeat the same idea with conviction, that repetition creates the illusion of legitimacy. What once might have seemed questionable begins to sound like common sense. And questioning common sense, as we know, can be socially uncomfortable. Little by little, the individual stops acting as an independent mind and begins functioning as part of a larger organism. Their opinions start aligning with the dominant narratives of the group to which they belong, not because someone directly forced them, but because the desire to remain integrated makes disagreement increasingly difficult. This phenomenon becomes even stronger when power presents itself as morally correct. Movements that claim to defend justice, security, or prosperity often gain an aura of moral legitimacy. Within that atmosphere, questioning the ideas of the group can seem not only strange, but almost wrong, as if thinking for oneself were a form of betrayal. Bonhoeffer realized that at this stage, something crucial happens within collective psychology. People stop evaluating ideas based on their content and begin evaluating them based on their origin. If a message comes from a respected authority or a powerful group, it tends to be accepted with far less intellectual resistance. Gradually, slogans begin replacing arguments. Short phrases, repeated countless times, start occupying the place of complex discussions. These expressions appear to convey absolute certainty, but in reality they function as mental shortcuts. They remove the need for deep reflection and offer the individual the comforting feeling of being on the right side. Over time, this dynamic transforms people's behavior in an almost imperceptible way. The citizen who once questioned begins to repeat. The individual who once reflected begins defending positions they have never carefully examined. And when someone from outside tries to raise doubts, the reaction is often immediate: rejection or hostility. This is how entire societies can enter a state of collective intellectual obedience. No one feels that they have lost their autonomy, but in practice, important decisions begin to be guided by shared narratives. Individual thought dissolves within an emotional and social current much larger than any single person. This transformation does not require direct violence or explicit coercion. Very often it happens almost silently, sustained only by the human desire to belong. After all, disagreeing with the group can mean isolation, criticism, or rejection. And for many people, the psychological cost of standing alone seems greater than the cost of agreeing. Perhaps that is why Bonhoeffer saw this phenomenon as one of the greatest dangers to any society. When individuals surrender their capacity for judgment to the collective, power no longer needs to control each person individually. It only needs to direct the crowd, and the crowd does the rest by itself. And if you pause for a moment and think about it honestly, you might realize that this dynamic does not belong only to the past or to authoritarian regimes. It can arise anywhere opinions turn into identities and questioning becomes socially risky. The uncomfortable question then begins to appear almost inevitably. At some point in your life, have you ever noticed a situation where the people around you seem to repeat the same ideas without really examining them? It may have happened in politics, on the internet, or even in everyday conversations. Share your perception in the comments, because understanding these moments might be the first step toward recognizing something even more unsettling about the behavior of crowds. When Bonhoeffer reflected on stupidity, what truly concerned him was not the behavior of a single isolated individual. The real danger emerged when this mental state began spreading throughout an entire group. A single person can commit serious mistakes, but a crowd convinced that it is absolutely right possesses a far greater potential for destruction. History repeatedly shows that great tragedies rarely begin with people who are aware that they are doing something wrong. Quite the opposite. In many cases, they begin with ordinary individuals who believe they are fulfilling a moral duty. This detail makes collective stupidity especially dangerous because it presents itself disguised as virtue. When someone acts with malicious intent, there is at least the possibility of identifying the danger with relative clarity. Ill-intentioned people usually provoke suspicion, resistance, and opposition. But a crowd convinced that it is fighting for a just cause can move forward with almost unshakable confidence, even when its actions produce devastating consequences. It is at this point that human behavior reveals one of its most uncomfortable tendencies. The need to belong to the group often becomes stronger than the need to be right. The individual feels that disagreeing with the majority may lead to social isolation, and this silent fear influences decisions in ways we rarely notice. One of the most well-known examples of this phenomenon appeared in the experiments conducted by psychologist Solomon Asch in the 1950s. The study seemed extremely simple. Participants only needed to compare the length of several lines and identify which one matched the reference line presented in front of them. The correct answer was obvious to any attentive observer. However, there was an important detail that the volunteers did not know. All the other participants in the room had previously agreed to give wrong answers on purpose. The goal was to observe how the individual would react in the presence of a seemingly confident majority. The result was surprising and deeply unsettling. At several moments during the experiment, participants clearly knew that the answer given by the group was wrong. Even so, a significant portion of them chose to repeat the same incorrect response simply to avoid standing apart from the others. This reveals something essential about human psychology. The discomfort of publicly disagreeing can be stronger than the perception of reality itself. When social pressure becomes strong enough, many people prefer to adjust their opinion to the majority, even when that majority is visibly mistaken. This mechanism helps explain how fragile ideas can transform into extremely resilient collective beliefs. Once the majority begins repeating the same narrative, each new individual feels pressure to align with what already appears widely accepted. In this way, belief strengthens not through evidence, but through repetition. Over time, this repetition creates a misleading sense of absolute consensus. Those observing from the outside may notice the inconsistencies, but those inside the collective dynamic begin to see the dominant narrative as practically unquestionable. Questioning becomes uncomfortable and sometimes even socially dangerous. It is precisely at this moment that entire societies can be led toward deeply misguided decisions, not because individuals have lost their intelligence, but because the social structure has created an environment where thinking independently has become rare. Conformity begins to feel safer than reflection. Bonhoeffer understood that this process does not transform people into conscious monsters. On the contrary, it turns ordinary individuals into unwitting participants in systems that produce enormous harm. The danger lies not in deliberate evil, but in the combination of obedience, conformity, and the absence of reflection. When millions of people begin acting this way at the same time, a phenomenon emerges that becomes extremely difficult to interrupt. Each individual believes they are simply following what everyone else seems to accept. Yet no one truly takes responsibility for questioning the direction the entire group is moving. Perhaps this is the most unsettling aspect of Bonhoeffer's entire theory. Collective stupidity does not require foolish, violent, or malicious people. It only requires individuals who have stopped carefully examining the ideas they defend. And when that happens on a large scale, the result can redefine the destiny of entire societies. If you look carefully at history, you will notice that many of humanity's most disturbing episodes began exactly this way, with ordinary people believing they were on the right side of history. This realization raises an uncomfortable question that each of us must consider honestly. Have you ever witnessed situations where an opinion seemed to spread rapidly simply because many people were repeating the same idea? Perhaps in online discussions, public debates, or even everyday conversations. If any experience like that comes to mind now, share it in the comments. These observations can reveal a great deal about how collective thinking truly works. Bonhoeffer's theory remains disturbing precisely because it does not point the finger at a distant enemy. It points to something much closer, The possibility that any society, in any era, can fall into this same silent mechanism where ordinary people stop thinking for themselves. Stupidity, in this sense, is not a rare defect. It is a condition that can arise whenever independent thinking is abandoned. Perhaps this is the most uncomfortable part of this entire reflection. Bonhoeffer was not trying to prove that some people are more intelligent than others. He was trying to show that the true protection against stupidity is not knowledge, but the courage to think. To think even when it is difficult. To think even when it means questioning ideas that appear to be unanimous. In a world where opinions circulate at absurd speed and ready-made narratives spread every day, preserving this capacity becomes even more important. The question that remains is therefore not only about the past or historical events. The question is about the present, about how each of us reacts when we encounter ideas that are widely accepted. If this kind of reflection made you see human behavior in a slightly different way, consider following the channel to continue exploring topics like this. Subscribing, leaving a like, and turning on notifications helps the content reach more people interested in better understanding the world around us and the invisible forces that shape our decisions. And before we finish, it is worth leaving you with a question to think about calmly. At some point in your life, have you ever noticed a situation where many people seem to repeat the same idea without really reflecting on it? It may have happened in public debates, online discussions, or even everyday conversations. If any experience like that comes to mind, share it in the comments. Sometimes, noticing these moments reveals much more about us than we imagine.